So today's presentation is going to be on the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Essentially, I'll get more into detail. However, I'll be overviewing this movement and its initial purpose, as well as elaborate on how this worldwide social movement is not only affecting Jewish people in Israel, but all over the world. I'll put a little bit of a focus here in New Mexico because it's so widespread. I could make a 2-hour presentation on this specific topic. However, we're going to be talking about this shift from going from peacefulness to hate speech towards Jewish people, because this BDS movement is essentially Palestinians wanting equal rights in Israel. And in Israel, the Jewish population is around 74%. So that's what today's topic is going to be on, as well as campus involvement, United States involvement, different policies and things that have been involved with this particular movement. The BDS time frame, so it was debated that it started around 2005, and so there was an advisory of Court of Justice in the West Bank that declared that Israel was violating international law. Therefore, in saying that it was against Israel against the Palestinian people. Therefore, this organization created this BDS movement to boycott and to divest and create these sanctions against Israel so that they can give fair treatment to the Palestinians in that area. And so it started off as these non-violent measures against Israel, and they comply with international law, and they started boycotting them. They started adding different little sanctions to them, and essentially what ended up happening, as we'll talk a little bit more as we go on, is how this movement goes from peaceful to hate speech. And so we'll be throwing this word anti-Semitism around, which is essentially discrimination and hate speech against Jewish people. So they initiated and affected, if it's affected by climate, political climate at the time, it was political, as you'll hear in the future slide of the goals and objectives. Essentially, what this had to do with international law and how by international law, other countries are getting involved, because then it becomes a United Nations issue. And so what ends up happening is more people get involved, more nations get involved, and before you know it, the whole world kind of has a say on it, whether they are for or against the movement and for or against the sanctions and so forth and so on. And how the BDS has been framed is essentially, again, it was essentially framed in Israel showing discrimination and unfair treatment towards Palestinians in Israel. Therefore, that was kind of what the movement was. And in order for people to get that fair treatment, they decided to create such boycotts and sanctions against the Israelis, and again in Israel, and so in Israel, again, the high population is Jews, and therefore what ends up happening is this frame starts to shift. We have this beautiful frame, the wood frame, which indicates, its clarity, which this is what our goal is. But the shift is to anti-Semitism, is people end up seeing kind of like the Jewish people in a negative light, because people say, okay, so Israel is being horrible towards Palestinians. The highest population in Israel are Jewish people. Therefore, Jewish people must be hateful towards Palestinians. So that's kind of what we're seeing, what's going on. So the BDS goals written out is ending the occupation and colonization of Arab lands and dismantling the wall, which the wall was created in Israel, and the Palestinians want that torn down. Because also another goal is they want to be recognized of their fundamental rights, and the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel want full equality. They also want to be respected and protected by promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees, and they want these refugees to return back to their homes and properties as stipulated by the United Nations resolution. The BDS campaign was organized and coordinated by the Palestinian BDS National Committee, and this is where they wanted Israel to be boycotted because they aren't meeting the obligations of the international law. Actions and strategies, and the role of communication technology. I've mentioned a couple different ones, but I'll touch upon the SodaStream territory factory. So essentially, SodaStream creates these beverages that are carbonated, which you can make drinks and stuff out of. And so what SodaStream does is they have these factories all over the world. And so one of the factories happens to be in Israel, which this is kind of an ironic thing because although Israel has a high Jewish population, the second highest population is Palestinians. Therefore, when they shut down this factory, the Palestinians who are being helped through this boycott are actually being hurt because the SodaStream has a lot of Palestinian workers in it. And so that's one of the many examples. Also, another one is a small group of European foreign ministers proposed that imported products made by Israelis in the West Bank, which is called Golan Heights, or East Jerusalem, require distinct labels to indicate that they were produced by Israeli colonies or settlements. Therefore, you kind of see this shift going towards, okay, so these were pretty much made by Israelis, and people tend to put, since Israel is a Jewish population, it's essentially made by Jewish people. And that's kind of what's creating this shift, is all kind of go on with this hate against Jewish people in particular. So, who is involved? So, the whole world is involved because it is a political issue, especially involving the United Nations. However, again, I'm going to focus kind of more on how New Mexico is involved and kind of a little bit of how these universities, these academic-driven BDS movements have been coming about. And so some interesting statistics. The 2018 statistics had shown of out of, let me see, 7,000 roughly hate crimes in New Mexico in 2018. 60% of the hate crime attacks that did occur were targeted against Jews and Jewish institutions. So there are also a couple instances that I had mentioned in the references where although they have these groups on the universities, Free Palestine groups and stuff like that, that just bash Jewish people as well as what's going on in Israel because of the mistreatment of Palestinians. However, we do see again this shift of like going from their initial thing of equality to just straight up hating the people or the population in which Israel is, which is Jewish. And so parallel movements and counter movements and international influence and allies. So parallel movements, I'll elaborate more on the following slide. However, parallel movements are those like universities are contributing. Counter movements, of course, as I'll mention in the future slide, like Jewish federations as well as other countries that back Israel. And one of the main ones that I recognized, I think the article came out not too long ago, President Trump had let out an executive order designed to fight anti-Semitism. And so what it writes is they want to effectively interpret Judaism as a race or nationality, not just as a religion, and that it could be used and stifle free speech and legitimate opposition to Israel's policy towards Palestinians in the name of fighting anti-Semitism. So the president is recognizing, and as he's expressed his support for Israel and the Israeli people, and as well as the Jewish people, and some of the allies are Jewish federations, of course, and the United States is definitely an ally for this movement. And you see a lot of allies also here in New Mexico, along with the Jewish Federation, those who support them. Formal and informal structures. So on the left, we have for the BDS movement are these universities, which a lot of these universities, it seems like they're being recruited. These academic institutions are being recruited through education, right? And as I'll go in my further slide of kind of this bias that we see for and against it in the media and things. And so what they use in this article is a really good parallel comparison to Native Americans being looked at as savages and now creating a cultural stereotype, kind of using that same imagery against Jewish people worldwide based on the initial BDS movement in Israel. Again, we see this transformation from, okay, so this movement is to help the Palestinians, and obviously because Israel's treating them bad, and then this mind shift begins of like, well, the population of Israel tend to be Jewish people, therefore it's the Jewish people that are the ones that are hateful. And you kind of see this rhetoric here in the media and in the universities and these types of news. And those who are against the BDS movement to the right is a picture of the Jewish Federation, and they obviously support the Jewish people, and they kind of see this shift of what's going on and how this anti-Semitism is going on throughout the country. Emotions motivating involvement in visual images. So I think the emotions were to support the BDS movement for equality, and I think things have been really good because they were peaceful at first, but now that you see them develop from the beginning year of this, you see people now being misinformed. That's why I put Facebook and all these other social media sites, because a lot of these things are one-sided. And so a lot of these things are like mistreated people, human rights. That's what a lot of people hear, those trigger words. Therefore, they're not getting their human rights met. And so they sometimes follow blindly, and they start hating country or religion or people because they don't essentially understand what's going on. Therefore, it's easy for them to blindly be led, because a lot of the world of academia, we do read a lot, and sometimes we just tend to believe what's told to us versus then kind of looking at the objective side. So what I'm essentially trying to do in this presentation is see this movement objectively, where I could see this shift from peaceful protest to starting to do these boycotts, starting to do these sanctions, and we can kind of see that transform as it gets bigger, because the world kind of gets blurry when you start getting too wide, and there's so much inside of it that people start picking certain words, and I think that's where this hate for Jewish people ended up coming about. Okay, so the role of social work. So a couple of ways that social work involvement could be in this particular movement could essentially be through groups. I know the Jewish Federation has groups and subgroups, and a lot of people in the United States, Jewish people, at least anecdotally, live in fear, because especially at university campuses, when they go to these meetings in support for or against the BDS movement, and so people that could seek help and therapy who are scared of getting hated against because of this movement, which, as I've explained, it's kind of summed down to that. Another recommendation for social work involvement could essentially be just statistical evidence, and just being able to see this movement from an outside perspective and kind of touch upon both sides, and hopefully people can read it from a objective standpoint, so that they can see the bigger picture and see this transformation. Because if we understand what's going on and how it started and how it's ending, maybe we could see along the lines of not only of how we can help people, but how we can fix future movements to go in the right direction to keep on the same path. I'm not going to mention the other movements that have kind of detracted from their initial goal, but that could definitely be a way as well. Another recommendation for social work, I think, would be a challenging one, is essentially just creating these groups and creating like these, helping with these policies in whether it's in the Roundhouse in Santa Fe or eventually to the federal level, and essentially writing things that do protect all free speech, and kind of drawing that line between free speech and hate speech to the point that it is creating this hate and potential of violence against a certain group or certain people, in this particular Jewish people. And so that concludes my presentation. I appreciate your time and your patience with that. And thank you, and have a good winter break.